Okay, now we've already talked about one-point perspective and the fact that one-point perspective is where we're using a single vanishing point placed along a horizon line with objects that have to face your viewing plane. They're parallel to your face, effectively, so you're looking at a flat planar side. One-point perspective always begins with the shape, and then the corners go back to the single vanishing point. Two-point perspective, which we talked about in the previous video, is where you're putting a horizon line separating sky from ground, and then you're establishing two vanishing points. In the case of this drawing, there were two different sets. Looking at this as our example, you start with a single line as the side, the corner which faces you, and you take from the top to both vanishing points, from the bottom to both vanishing points. You are basing this on visual perception. You look at your object, you proceed back to where it appears to be that distance, which you can record visually as you look. You make a point. All the verticals are parallel, so you make a point, bring that line down. You come back to the center point, you go to the other end, you make a point where it appears that end ends, you make a parallel vertical to that front corner, and then you have two sides, and you reverse direction when you get to the back and go the opposite way. When you get to the back, you go to the opposite way. So that was that 2-point that we did in the second video. Now we're going to combine 1-point and 2-point on one drawing and do a little bit more with those. So perspective always starts with a horizon line, and I'm freehanding. I'd mentioned that in the last ones, that you can line this off using a ruler, a yardstick. I'm just freehanding. So we have sky, ground. We have the horizon line, which can also be called eye level. We're going to use 1-point and 2 points. The first thing I'm going to do, since we are just practicing, so I'm not basing this right now on finding where these vanishing points would be based on the perception of objects. Instead, I'm going to force objects into this demonstration. So I'm putting 1 point on one end of the paper, and I'm putting the other point on the opposite end of the paper, just to give me a broad range so you can't quite see both sides, but I can move the paper around. 2-point perspective always starts with a line, so we're going to end up making this into some kind of a cabinet, let's say. I'm looking at a cabinet in a room, and what faces me is a corner. So I draw that line to equal the corner. I go from the top to each of my vanishing points. So I go to that side, and then I go to the opposite side. And again, I'm freehanding. I could be using, maybe I should be using my yardstick. So now I have this single point with two planes defined going back towards each of the horizon lines. I'm going to look at my shape. We'll say it's a bookcase. And I'm going to travel along. I chose this top y-axis. I'm going to go back and I'm going to say it ends about right there based on my perception. Draw another parallel line. This corner is parallel to this corner. I'm going to come back to the start, and I'm going to go the opposite direction, and I'm looking and it's shallower, so it ends about right there. I'm going to draw another line straight up and down, parallel to the front corner, parallel, parallel, parallel. Now, I'm starting at my center point again. I'll go over to the one I began with. I know that I was traveling this direction, which means when I get to that back corner, I change direction and go to the opposite vanishing point. So there's the line I'm going to need. I come to the bottom and I do the same thing. making these lines fairly light because there's a lot of erasing when we're working in perspective. So now I'll travel back to my beginning corner again, this line. I'm going to go the opposite direction for that shallow side. I know that I was going that way, which means when I get to this back corner, I'm going to change directions and go to the other vanishing point. Since I've been freehanding, I'll just keep freehanding. I'm going to come to the bottom, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to the opposite vanishing point. And now I know I want this line. I'm going to darken these. I want this line. Hello. I want this line. I want this line. I want that line. So if we're going to make this a bookcase, I'm going to save these lines that would be visible here. I forgot to connect that back corner with a vertical. If this was a bookcase, I can just find a center point by bisecting from corner to corner any of my planes. This is the center point. So if I project from that opposite vanishing point through there, there would be the surface. There would be the angle of that shelf. If I go to this point, go to my opposite vanishing point, so I can draw a line here, get the back edge. Once again, that vanishing point is my guide. So if I was putting a shelf in there, there would be a shelf. I could erase out. I could erase out the guidelines I don't need. And now I have a shelf in 2-point perspective. So we can see, there it is. And I want to put something on top of that shelf, and I'm going to use 1-point perspective for it. So I can look at this top plane, and let's just imagine. Let's put a big thick book. So I'll just start by putting a rectangle, and I'm drawing it right through that shape that's there. So all I did was I drew a rectangle right through. I didn't try to make a corner line. I didn't try to make it match any of the angles. I just drew it that it is parallel to the bottom edge of the page and the top edge of the page parallel to the horizon. So that it's easier to see, I'm even going to erase out that little bit of an angle that's visible. And I'm going to choose, I'll just put a vanishing point there, a single vanishing point, because we're using this as a demonstration, meaning I'm not basing this on what I'm seeing. I'm basing it on demonstrating the technique. So it's 1-point perspective, so I go to each of the corners and I project back to that single vanishing point. So each of the corners back. I can do that one that I know is going to be invisible, but we'll do it anyway. So I'm going to make this a book. I'm going to come on this bottom edge in this case because I want it to feel like it's sitting pretty much on the top of this. I'll go to the back corner and make a parallel line. So this line is parallel to that line. And then I'll just connect straight across the back. That equals the front, straight across the back. That equals this bottom edge. And then I'll just drop a vertical for that back corner. So then I'm going to do a lot of erasing. Because if this was a book, I wouldn't be able to see through it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just give it, darken the lines that would be the top cover. I'm going to put a little curve in here instead of that straight line, as though I'm looking at the books, and I'm going to put another curve there as though it's the binding. So now using 1-point perspective combined with 2 points. So these planes are receding to 2 vanishing points. This rectangular shape, which was the starting point, from each corner recedes to a single vanishing point. If I wanted to put another book, I'll add another book down here inside of this case. So once again, all I'm going to do is come and right over what I see, I'm going to put, I'll make this some kind of a really big book. So I'll put a rectangular shape there. And I don't even have to use that same vanishing point if I didn't want. But we can make this easy and just use that one. So I'm going to come up corner to corner, corner, up to the vanishing point, up to the vanishing point. Here's my front. I'll come back, decide I want to cut this book off. There would be my top cover. It is in such a skew angle that I don't even see either of the two sides. So in this case, it sort of ended up being a little bit easy. I could erase out what is inside. I'll do that same thing again and give this a little curve and this a curve, like I'm looking at the end of the... So now I've got a 2-point perspective bookcase with 2 different books placed using 1-point perspective. And if I want, we can proceed to add more things to this if I would like to do that. So let's just imagine, let's put a rug on the floor, and we'll keep it parallel. So I'll use the 2 existing vanishing points, because I could put multiple. There could be many sets of vanishing points if I was actually drawing from observation in a room. But we'll make this feel really, really parallel. So I'm just going to put a rug as though it's laying in front of this bookcase. Now a rug is no different from any other shape, except that when you think of it, it barely has thickness. So if you were starting to do 2-point perspective for a rug, instead of a long line, I'm just going to do a little teeny line. Because that corner, if you imagine a corner of the rug, is not going to have a lot of thickness. So if I was doing that, and I'll use the yardstick since it's harder at this point to see. So I'm going to project from that little point I have up through that vanishing point. And I'm going to proceed from that little corner that I have to go back through the opposite vanishing point. And I'm going to come along this long side of this rug, and I'm going to say it looks like it ends about there. And since I went this way, when I get to this corner, I'm going to change directions and go to the opposite vanishing point. So I'm laying that ruler back to the other vanishing point, drawing that line out. So at this point, you can see how that rug is sort of fitting in there. And let's say that we're just going to make it a long rectangular rug. So I can go, I'm looking and I say it looks like it ends about there. So I go back to my vanishing point, back here. I lay it until it's parallel. I lay it until it intersects that point that I determined. And then in this case, this rug that I've placed using the same vanishing points here and here, it appears as though it is I'm having spatial challenges getting that piece of paper under the little camera. So there we go. Now that would be a rug with this. If you were going to do some basic light and shadow, so I'm just going to throw in some nice simple hatch . So I'm going to crisscross, make that the darkest in the back. I'll make this one over here dark, it's inside. I'll erase out these guidelines. I'll make the books have some details. So I'll put some lines in to suggest pages. Let's give this one local value, meaning the cover, we'll just make the cover a dark material. So I've not done a lot of effort, but it's starting to feel at least a little bit more dimensional. Let's imagine this rug has some kind of fringe, and I'm following. The angle of that fringe is actually aiming back at the vanishing point. And the same thing here. This would be bigger, it's closer to us. So with just a little bit of effort, it starts at least appearing illusionistic. So that would be using 1-point perspective on those two shapes, and 2-point perspective starting with a line on both the rug on the floor and the bookcase. Thank you. The next video is going to discuss how you can use these rules to make something that's softer edged, a little less obviously regular than these extremely planar examples that we've used so far.